Chapter 13, American Civilizations. Let's start with the geography of the Americas. First, we'll talk about the Andes Mountains, which is this mountain range right here. It's the longest mountain range in the world. It stretches to almost the entire length of, or the western half of South America. So it starts up here in Venezuela, all the way down to the tip of Chile. North and South America. North America will be up in this area. Here's South America. And then there's this area right here. So this is considered an isthmus that connects the two larger continents. So it connects North and South America through this piece of land right here, known as an isthmus. That's what we commonly call Central America today. The ancient civilizations that developed in North America is in a region that we now call Mesoamerica. So this is kind of the Mesoamerica area right here. And it includes parts of Mexico, which is this area, and Central America, which would be right in this area. Many of these areas are lowlands, which generally were tropical, which means they had dense, steamy jungles, really hot. The ancient civilizations we're going to talk about in this chapter, the earliest, or the first, was the OLMEC, the first and earliest civilization to develop in Mesoamerica. They were farmers. They had raised mounds and huge stone monuments for religious ceremonies. These big old heads here, known as the OLMEC heads, were part of those religious ceremonies. And you can see on the map here where the OLMECs developed. It's right in this area of Mexico right here, close to this Yucatan Peninsula. And we don't know for sure why, but they started to abandon their cities in the 400s. Well, probably in the 300s they started to abandon, and then by the 500s, and by the 400s BC they were completely disappeared from this area. The next group we're going to talk about are the Maya. The Maya formed in areas in what is now known as Guatemala, Belize, and the Yucatan Peninsula. So here is Guatemala today, right here. Belize is right here, and this is the Yucatan Peninsula. So this is where the Maya developed. At its height, there were huge cities in the empire. Mayan cities like Tikal and Palenque had magnificent plazas, palaces, and pyramids, as you can see some remains of those palaces here. Many cities had large stone monuments called steles, which you see here. They had carved glyphs. Glyphs are, kind of the writing of the time that represented great events. Mayans wrote glyphs, so that's the writing, on a paper that formed a book called a codex. So you can kind of see what a codex looks like here. Mayan mathematics were based on the number 20. Now, today, our number system is based on tens. The Mayan mathematics were based on 20s, and the Mayas were the first, or one of the first, to use zero. They also charted the orbit of Venus. So they were astronomers, and they produced an accurate calendar for farming. Moving on to our third ancient civilization, they are the Aztecs. The Aztecs were nomads that eventually settled on an island in a large lake where they built their capital called Tenochtitlan. Now I'm going to give you a little story about this. The Aztecs were nomadic, so they wandered around, and the way the myth goes is that they would keep wandering until they saw a sign from their gods that's where they should sit or settle. So one of the signs was that they would find a cactus with an eagle on top of it with a snake in its mouth. That was a sign from the gods that's where they should settle. So this cactus with the eagle and the snake was found in the middle of a lake called Lake Texcoco, and that's where they decided to settle. And they built their large capital on this island called Tenochtitlan, and because it was on an island, they had to create, in order to grow crops, floating gardens called chinampas. And they were kind of like, they weren't really floating, but they looked like they were floating. They're basically built up land from under the lake that kind of stuck up in the water, or they used baskets and put dirt in them to plant things as well. Life for the Aztecs was dominated by religion. They believed in over 1,000 gods, which oftentimes required human sacrifices. They also created two calendars, one for studying the sky because they were astronomers like the Maya. It went for farming. And they also created color for codices. That's the plural for codex, which I just showed you a few minutes ago. In 1502, the Emperor Montezuma was in power and angered his subjects by wanting more and more tribute, which is kind of like a fee, and human sacrifices for some rebelling. So some of those people were rebelling against Montezuma's tough rule. In 1519, the Spanish, who had heard of the riches of Tenochtitlan, came, led by a guy named Hernan Cortez. They arrived, they captured Montezuma, who let them in freely, thinking they were gods, and they eventually conquered the Aztecs. Now, they did this through a couple ways. Obviously, some of the people were rebelling, so they were weak, but they also had brought diseases over with them. The way the story goes is that because of Montezuma and being captured by the Spanish and being overthrown by the Spanish, today when you go to Spain or to Mexico, they tell you not to drink the water. Because if you drink the water, then you will get Montezuma's revenge, which we commonly call diarrhea. The Inca are the last of the four ancient civilizations of the Americas. The Incas lived in the Andes Mountains in South America. So this is the Andes again. And they formed their capital called Cuzco, which is right here. Farmers cut terraces into the sides of mountains to use to grow crops. And they had a system of roads that crisscrossed the empire with runners called chasquis, who carried messages. There's a chasqui right there. Now, when I talk about the terrace farming, what we have here is, let's say you have a mountain. And then you have these little terraces here, where it's kind of flat parts of the mountain where they plant crops. A civil war broke out in 1527 when Atahualpa defeated his brother to become the king. That made them weak. And so the Spanish, as they're attacking the Aztecs, had a different group come to the Incas, led by Francisco Pizarro, and the Spanish arrived in 1532 and conquered the Incas because they were already weakened by their civil war. Plus, again, the Europeans brought diseases with them that wiped out many of the Inca. That is the end of chapter 13.